I'm Ed Adams, and this is the Weekly Genealogy Toolkit, the podcast that helps new genealogists get the most out of their research time and avoid the most common pitfalls. Growing up in the 80s and 90s, I feel like I was treated to one of the best times in television history. Things are sadly different now, and somehow the passage of time seems to have affected those old shows as well. I've gone back and I've watched several of my old favorites, and they just don't seem very good. But it's not that the stories weren't entertaining or the acting wasn't good. I think it's just that the unbridled optimism of that time period is gone, and so the entertainment of that age seems unsettlingly out of place. I remember enjoying mystery shows like the old Columbo reruns, Father Dowling, Diagnosis Murder, the original Law & Order, but I think one of my favorites had to be Murder, She Wrote. I enjoyed her witty breakdowns of the details of the crime right at the end of each episode. I mean, that was the formula of the genre at the time, but Angela Lansbury was just really good at it. I remember that in many cases, the central pieces that led her to solving the murder were inconsistencies in the timelines of the stories told by the murderers. You know, it was the story that the murderer had left the location where the crime occurred beforehand and had a rock-solid alibi of having been at the movies with her friend. Except that the receipt from the parking garage at the movie theater showed that she arrived 15 minutes late for the movie, more than enough time to have done the deed. There was always more to it, but I kind of liked it when an illogical timeline tipped her off to who the culprit was. Well, in the world of genealogy, hopefully you're not having to solve murders, but you're an investigator nonetheless. The tools used by the detectives can be wielded just as effectively by you on your search for answers to your genealogical questions. Building a timeline can be an excellent way to audit your existing research, reject potential hypotheses, or provide indirect evidence towards potential answers. Timelines are relatively easy things to put together, but there are some more sophisticated tools that you can play around with to make things a bit easier. At the most basic, all you really need is a sheet of paper and a pencil. You'll start jotting down facts that you've found and put them in chronological order. It's also helpful to jot down the age of your ancestor in each year so you can quickly identify things like, it looks like your great-great-grandfather got married in his mid-30s. That's unusual and should throw up a red flag. Perhaps there were prior marriages that you haven't found yet. You can make a note of all the abnormalities in your timeline and then look to find explanations for them. Once you go back and investigate, perhaps you can find one or two additional spouses that you'd never found before. Now your timeline can help you make some good hypotheses as to which children belong to which mother. Speaking of children, while building a timeline, you might discover that someone you had attributed as a child couldn't have been a child because your ancestor was 12 when he or she was born. But this is the hard way, and there are easier ways. For a long time, I just used Excel. Microsoft Excel has been a part of my working life for a long time, and I'm pretty comfortable with it. So I can put together a timeline quickly, and using a few formulas, I can have some of the timeline auto-sorted or ages calculated. Just some things to make my life a little easier. These days, I use an application called Eon Timeline. That's AEON. I'll put a link in the description. It took me a bit of time to learn how to use it effectively, but once I figured it out, it's a great tool to look at both a singular timeline, like events in your ancestor's life, as well as multiple intersecting timelines, like events in your ancestor's life, in the context of events in another person's life, or major historical events. Ancestry.com's Facts view, when looking at your ancestor's profile, has a pretty good timeline along the left-hand side, and some popular genealogy software will also help quickly compile a timeline. No matter what you use, simply getting everything organized into a chronological order can immediately illuminate errors or areas of further investigation. Assuming that you'll start with a simple spreadsheet, the basic information that you need to include in a timeline are obviously the date of the event, the age of your ancestor on that date, the event that occurred like the birth, marriage, children's birth, that sort of thing, and the source citation for the event. With these simple bits of information organized chronologically, you can get a much better visibility on inconsistencies with age, location, or the logical order of things. This can be a great thing to do when you've gotten a little burned out by trying to get through a brick wall, go back and build timelines for your ancestors in that brick wall line, and you might very well find out that you built that brick wall because you've got errors further up the line that are leading your investigation in the wrong direction. Auditing and fixing errors isn't the only usefulness of building timelines for genealogy. This is something I do to build context and a better understanding of the lives of my ancestors. In particular, I do this for every ancestor of mine who served in the military during times of war. Wars are complex things that often have multiple significant events occurring either simultaneously or near simultaneously across vast spans of geography. So when I discover an ancestor who served during, say, the Civil War, that doesn't really provide me with much information. Even if I find what unit he served in, that helps only slightly. Soldiers were commonly not with their units for extended periods. They may have been on furlough or in the hospital. They may have been on detached duty away from their unit. And in some cases, you may even find that they were AWOL or absent without leave for a short period of time. So I can start by building a timeline of major events of the Civil War by theater of operation. Then, under those theaters of operation, I can build additional timeline information gleaned from unit histories of the units that my ancestors served in during the Civil War. Then, within those units, I can build a timeline for each of my ancestors as understood from their service records. Using this technique, I have determined what battles my ancestors participated in, potential stories behind their promotions, more specific circumstances of how and when they were wounded or killed, and more. I remember when I first mapped it out for all 9 of my Civil War ancestors, I realized that for 3 days in July of 1863, my future existence was really up in the air, as I had 3 ancestors involved in the Battle of Gettysburg, none of them having had their children that I descend from yet. This kind of realization can give you pause and make you take an accounting of your own life. But if you're not the introspective type, this practice can still at least give you clues as to additional places to look for information about your ancestors' service. I definitely want to do an episode on Civil War research at some point so that we can go into more detail on that. The contextual building usefulness of timelines, of course, extends well beyond sorting out military records. It means that you can help notice things like the fact that your ancestor lived in Morton County, Kansas in the 1930s and 40s, which means that they endured the infamous Dust Bowl period. Or maybe your ancestor died in late September of 1918 in Philadelphia. After building your major events timeline, you realize that your ancestor was far from the only one. So perhaps it's time to take a page from Jessica Fletcher's book and look critically at your research. Build those timelines so you can start to catch those inconsistencies and areas of interest. And, once you've solved the mystery, be sure to clue everyone else in on it by writing up a report. But that's a conversation for another day. I hope that you give timelines a try. If you do, or you already have and have solved a wicked hard problem with it, I'd love for you to tell me about it on Twitter @TheWGTPod. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.